It started like any ordinary morning. The Florida sun had just begun to creep over the horizon, casting long golden fingers across the still streets of Debari. Birds chirped in the distance, and the world seemed at peace. But inside one quiet home, something was terribly wrong.
I don't think Patrick De La Cerda had any idea what was waiting for him on the other side of that door. There's multiple shots fired. Patrick was hit multiple times. It appeared that he was killed in like ambush style.
I will miss my son, and I regret that I wasn't there for him to save him.
Jessica Devnani woke up early, her heart fluttering with excitement. She and Patrick De La Cerda had been making plans, dreaming about a future together, a future full of love, laughter, and a life they could call their own.
And I'll never forget the scene. Like, it's still in my head every day.
They had whispered into the night about wedding plans, about building a home, about promises of forever. As Jessica reached for her phone to send him a good morning text, she expected to find a reply waiting for her. Maybe one of his sweet, teasing messages that always made her smile, but her screen stayed blank.
If anybody else is here. Is anybody else here?
It was just the worst thing you could ever see in your entire life.
Clearly, this wasn't a random killing.
Someone had a vendetta against Patrick.
It was personal. It was planned. It was an assassination.
My whole future was taken away from me. My whole world was taken away.
At first, she told herself not to overthink. Patrick could have overslept. Maybe he was busy. It was silly to worry so quickly, wasn't it? But this wasn't like him. Patrick was the kind of man who always answered, who never let a message or a call go unanswered, especially from her.
I didn't think too much of it because, it was early in the morning. When I got to work and I tried to call Patrick over and over again and there was no answer, which I thought was weird because he always answers every phone call. I just felt like something was wrong. I left work right away to check on Patrick.
The entire drive, her heart pounded against her ribs like a drum. She begged the universe for it to be nothing, for Patrick to open the door smiling, teasing her for worrying too much. But deep inside, a cold certainty whispered otherwise. As she pulled into his driveway, everything looked normal. Patrick's car was parked exactly where it should be. There was no sign of forced entry, no signs of trouble. Yet the house felt wrong, too still, too silent. Jessica called out his name, knocking on the door at first, then pounding harder when there was no response. Still nothing. Panic rising, she noticed the door was slightly ajar. A sliver of darkness yawned back at her. She hesitated for just a second, her mind screaming for her to turn back, but she pushed it open. What she saw inside shattered her world. The scene didn't make sense. Nothing made sense. Patrick, the man who had filled her life with warmth and laughter, now lay cold and still. Jessica stumbled backward, the world spinning around her. She fumbled for her phone, dialing 911 with shaking hands.
911, where's your emergency?
Has been shot and killed.
When did that happen?
I don't know.
You don't want to try CPR, correct?
No, he's dead. He's cold.
Sirens tore through the morning air. Moments later, the flashing lights painting the sleepy neighborhood in strokes of red and blue.
If anybody else is here. Is anybody else here?
Officers swarmed the house while Jessica stood frozen outside, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Inside, investigators found evidence of a brutal attack, one carried out with precision and rage. It was clear this wasn't a robbery gone wrong or a random break-in. Whoever had done this had planned it, had wanted to make sure Patrick never walked away. The realization sent a chill down the spines of everyone involved. This was personal. Jessica's mind reeled. Who could do something like this? Patrick was beloved by everyone who knew him. He was kind, caring, gentle. He had no enemies. Nothing about this fit. And yet, as detectives began digging into Patrick's life and Jessica's, a shadow from the past emerged. A name Jessica hadn't spoken in months, but one that once held her captive in fear. Gregory. Gregory Bender had once been the center of Jessica's life. A man she thought she loved, until love turned to control, then fear, then a desperate need to escape. Jessica had broken free from him, finding solace in Patrick's arms, building a new life for herself. But some obsessions don't die quietly. Some linger in the shadows, growing darker and more twisted with time. Had Gregory been lurking all along, watching from the darkness as Jessica tried to move on? Had he been planning this final act of revenge, waiting for the perfect moment to strike? As investigators pieced together the puzzle, they began to uncover a chilling trail. One that would reveal just how far someone would go when love turns into dangerous obsession.
I'm making a phone call. I'm giving instructions, and I'm going to have my plan put into action. Call me back and talk to me. I'll talk to you soon, I hope.
But on that morning, Jessica didn't know any of that. She only knew that her future had been ripped away, and the man she loved most was gone. Somewhere out there, the person responsible was still free, and far closer than she could ever imagine. To understand the horror that unfolded that morning, you have to go back, months before Jessica found herself standing in that driveway, shattered. You have to understand the man who refused to let her go. Gregory Bender was not a stranger to success. He lived in a sprawling mansion, tucked away in an exclusive gated community near Orlando. Wealth came easily to him, a life of privilege, access, and influence. On the surface, he was charming, charismatic even. The kind of man who could win over a crowd with a smile.
He had a very charismatic personality. He was very intelligent. It felt like we'd known each other all our lives. He became my best friend.
Was he a down-to-earth kind of guy?
Not so much in the sense that he did like to show off. He loved fast cars and he loved guns as well.
But behind closed doors, Gregory was someone else entirely. Jessica had met Gregory during a time in her life when she was vulnerable, looking for stability, for something real. At first, he showered her with attention. Expensive gifts, lavish vacations, promises whispered in the dark. It was overwhelming, intoxicating even. Jessica fell hard, believing she had found the kind of love that fairy tales promised. But fairy tales, as it turned out, could quickly twist into nightmares. As the months went on, Gregory's affection grew darker. Possessiveness crept in. He wanted to know where she was at all times, who she spoke to, what she wore, who she smiled at. Every innocent moment twisted into suspicion in his mind. The man who once made her feel adored now made her feel trapped, suffocated. Arguments escalated into threats.
Can't believe you did this to me, and you didn't tell me about this. This is going to end. He is going to end. I can't believe you did this. Call me now, or all hell is going to break loose.
Threats became frightening incidents Jessica rarely spoke about to anyone. The world outside their relationship never saw the cracks. To outsiders, they were still the perfect couple. Only Jessica knew the truth. It took everything she had to walk away, to pack her things, to leave behind the life Gregory had built for her, a life that felt more like a gilded cage. She moved on cautiously, always looking over her shoulder, hoping Gregory would let her go, that he would accept it was over. But Gregory Bender was not the kind of man who accepted rejection. When Jessica met Patrick, everything changed. Patrick was gentle, patient.
I didn't have any hope that I was going to meet anyone, but just after a few days, Patrick sent me a message. I could tell that he was very smart and that he was very charismatic.
He showed her that love didn't have to hurt, that being cared for could feel safe, not controlling. Jessica flourished with him.
As soon as we met, I knew he was the one. It was kind of like love at first sight. Our relationship just took off. It's as if we were waiting to meet each other. Patrick was the life of the party. Any room you would go to, he would light it up. His personality was just full of life, and he was always making me laugh.
Oh, it didn't work out.
They talked about getting married, about building a real life together, one free from fear.
I loved everything about him. There was not a mean bone in his body. He treated me like a queen.
Jessica, look this way.
Patrick and I, we had our whole future planned out. He wanted kids. He wanted a relationship with his mother.
And for a while, it seemed like the nightmare with Gregory was firmly in the past, but it wasn't. In the months leading up to Patrick's murder, strange things began happening. Jessica received odd messages. Patrick mentioned feeling like someone was watching them. Investigators digging into Patrick's murder quickly uncovered this toxic history. Jessica, still reeling from the loss, recounted everything. The relationship with Gregory, the frightening way it ended, the lingering fears she had tried to bury. It didn't take long for detectives to start connecting dots. Gregory had motive. He had means. He had the cold, calculating nature required to orchestrate something so meticulously brutal. But suspicion wasn't proof. Gregory lived behind guarded gates in a fortress, protected by wealth and connections. Accusing him of murder would require more than just Jessica's word.
When the police came to my job, at the time, I had the police officer listen to the voice message.
Don't push me here. All I'm doing is asking to talk to you right now. I'm not asking for anything else. Unblock me. Enough is enough.
Detectives needed evidence. Solid, undeniable proof that Gregory had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. They began digging into phone records, into emails, into anything that might show Gregory's movements leading up to that fateful morning. What they uncovered was chilling. Gregory's obsession hadn't ended when Jessica walked away. It had only deepened, festering into a violent fixation. He had kept tabs on her life. He had known about Patrick. He had watched from the shadows as she tried to find happiness without him. And somewhere along the way, Gregory made a decision. If he couldn't have Jessica, no one could. Detectives soon learned that Gregory had acquired a detailed plan. It wasn't a crime of passion, a sudden burst of rage. It was methodical, thought out. Every step, every action carefully laid out.
Gregory had called Jessica at least twice on the morning of the 28th.
He called you this morning.
Yeah, on my work phone, 'cause it's not allowed to call me, so I got scared. That's when I texted Patrick.
So when she got the phone call and saw on the caller ID that it was Gregory Bender, flags started going up, and that's when made her so worried. And in that time, it was very clear that he was the most promising lead.
Patrick's death had been orchestrated like a cruel symphony, and Gregory was the conductor. Yet even with this growing mountain of suspicion, the question remained, could they prove it? Could they bring down a man who had spent his entire life believing he was untouchable? The race was on. Investigators knew that if Gregory realized he was being watched, he might slip away, disappearing into the labyrinth of legal protection that his wealth could easily buy. They needed to move fast. They needed to be smart, because the man they were up against wasn't just any suspect. Gregory Bender was a man who believed the rules didn't apply to him, and in his mind, he had already gotten away with murder. It was supposed to be an ordinary morning. Jessica kissed Patrick goodbye as he stepped out the front door of their home in Windermere, Florida. He smiled at her the way he always did. That gentle, reassuring smile that made her feel safe. If only she had known it would be the last time she ever saw it. Patrick had no idea he was being hunted. As he climbed into his car and pulled away, somewhere in the shadows, Gregory Bender was already watching. He had been planning this moment for weeks, perhaps months. In his mind, Patrick wasn't a person. He was an obstacle, the final barrier between Gregory and the life he still believed he was entitled to have with Jessica. And Gregory was done waiting. The morning air was still cool when Patrick pulled into the driveway of a friend's house. He had agreed to stop by to help with a quick project before heading to work. The neighborhood was quiet, still wrapped in the haze of early morning. No one noticed the man parked a few houses down, sitting in a rental car. Inside the rental car, Gregory gripped a gun tightly in his hand. His heart pounded, but his mind was disturbingly clear. He had rehearsed this moment over and over again in his head. This wasn't a spontaneous act of rage. It was a cold, calculated mission. Patrick stepped out of his car, arms full of tools. He didn't even hear Gregory approaching. Didn't have time to register the figure moving fast, low, determined across the street. The first shot hit Patrick in the chest. He staggered back, confused, dropping everything he was carrying. He tried to call out, but the next shot silenced him. Gregory didn't hesitate. He fired again and again, making sure Patrick would never get back up. The sound of gunfire shattered the stillness of the neighborhood, but it was over in seconds. Patrick crumpled to the pavement, a dark pool spreading beneath him. Gregory stood over him for a moment, breathing heavily, almost as if admiring his work. Then he calmly turned, got back into his car, and drove away, disappearing before the first neighbor even stepped outside to see what had happened. When emergency services arrived minutes later, it was already too late. Patrick's body lay lifeless, sprawled on the driveway, his blood staining the concrete. Officers cordoned off the area, their radios crackling with urgent updates. No witnesses, no clear description of the shooter, just a body, riddled with bullets, in a cold trail growing colder by the second.
I never got to say goodbye to my son. I never got to talk to him. Nothing.
You can see the front door was open. There's glass all over the place. There's a lot of blood. Right off the bat, you're going, okay, this is probably going to be a whodunit.
Jessica's world imploded when she got the call. The words didn't make sense at first. Patrick shot, Patrick gone. It felt like a cruel mistake, a nightmare she would surely wake up from. She raced to the scene, her heart shattering with every step. Seeing the flashing lights, the line of yellow tape, the stretcher carrying a body covered by a sheet, that's when reality hit her. A part of her died right there on that quiet suburban street. Detectives quickly realized this wasn't a random act of violence. Nothing had been stolen. There was no sign of a struggle, no robbery gone wrong. Whoever killed Patrick had one purpose: to end his life. And that pointed investigators in one very specific direction. In the days that followed, Jessica's fear turned to something else: clarity. She knew deep in her bones who was responsible. Gregory, the man who had promised to love her but had only ever sought to control her. The man who couldn't stand to see her happy with someone else. Detectives pored over every detail. Surveillance footage from nearby homes was collected and reviewed frame by frame. They spotted the rental car, a nondescript sedan creeping through the neighborhood minutes before the shooting. Tracing it back to Gregory took time, but each breadcrumb brought them closer. When they raided Gregory's home, they found more than they bargained for. Hidden in a safe, they discovered a detailed, handwritten plan, a blueprint of Patrick's murder.
And in the trash can, right on top, I see a map, a hand-drawn map on some torn-out pages from a spiral notebook. And I was in shock. So there's no way that we just found this murder plan.
It's almost unbelievable and just shocking that he would forget something so simple as tossing the murder plan in a trash can and not throwing it away.
Some of the first things in it were directions. And it actually had Patrick de la Cerda's address, Allen Boulevard. The sketch of the property was spot on.
Gregory had stalked them. He had planned every move, every contingency. And in the end, he pulled the trigger without hesitation. The evidence was damning. The crime was brutal. He remained silent through much of the questioning, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. The plan, the gun, the witnesses, the motive. He had thought he could get away with it, but the law was relentless. The trial of Gregory Bender began with a tension that could almost be felt in the air. The courtroom was filled with somber faces, some grieving, others determined for justice to be served. Jessica sat in the front row, her face unreadable, yet her eyes betrayed the deep sadness that lingered beneath the surface. This was it, the moment when everything would be laid bare, when the man who had shattered her life would face the consequences of his actions. The prosecution wasted no time in presenting their case.
Patrick de la Cerda was the victim of a murder, a detailed and meticulously thought out murder plan, and a tragic ending in which he was shot 4 times in the head, face, chest, and hip.
They laid out the cold, hard facts one by one. Gregory's obsession with Jessica, his history of violent tendencies, his murder of Patrick, and the evidence that tied him to the crime. Surveillance footage, witness testimony, and forensic evidence all pointed directly to Gregory. He was the man who had pulled the trigger, who had turned a moment of jealousy into an act of pure, calculated rage. The prosecutors spoke with authority, their voices cutting through the silence of the courtroom. Gregory Bender thought he could control Jessica's life, the lead prosecutor said, his gaze fixed firmly on the jury. But he couldn't stand the idea that she had moved on, that she had found happiness with someone else. So he killed Patrick Davis. He murdered an innocent man, and for what? To feed his own ego, to fulfill his sick need for power. This was not an act of passion. This was an act of premeditated murder. Jessica couldn't help but flinch at the words. The trial was opening wounds she had worked so hard to heal, but she knew this was part of the process, the part where she had to face the truth, no matter how painful. She glanced at Gregory, who sat at the defense table, his expression still as cold and detached as it had been when he was arrested. There was no remorse in his eyes, no sign of guilt. He looked like a man who had convinced himself that he was somehow justified in his actions.
He was looking at me. I don't know what was going on in his head.
The defense, however, took a different approach. They tried to paint Gregory as a man who had been deeply hurt by his breakup with Jessica, a man who had lost control in a moment of emotional turmoil. They argued that while his actions were undeniably violent, they were not premeditated. Gregory, they claimed, had been overwhelmed by his emotions, unable to think clearly, unable to stop himself. It was a crime of passion, the defense attorney argued, his voice soft but persuasive. Gregory loved Jessica. He wanted to be with her. Yes, he made a terrible choice, but that doesn't make him a cold-blooded killer. He wasn't thinking straight. He acted out of a broken heart. The jury listened intently, but the evidence was too overwhelming. Gregory's calculated behavior before and after the murder, his surveillance of Patrick's home, his preparation for the crime, none of it suggested a momentary lapse in judgment. It suggested something far darker, a man consumed by rage, willing to go to any lengths to control the woman he once loved. As the days passed, witnesses were called to the stand. Friends of Jessica spoke about the turmoil she had endured during her relationship with Gregory. They recalled his erratic behavior, his constant tracking of her every move, and his refusal to accept the end of their relationship. Patrick's family spoke of the hole left in their lives after his death.
Your Honor, I want to thank all of you for having put evil where it belongs.
You will not win. You have only lost. I hope you feel some peace, Patrick. Rest assured, the man who took your life is going to pay with his own life now.
I will miss my son, and I regret that I wasn't there for him to save him.
The grief that had changed everything. Then Jessica herself was called to testify. The room fell silent as she took the stand, her heart racing in her chest. She had never thought she'd be here, not in a million years. But this was her truth, the truth of what had happened to her, to Patrick, and to the life she had tried so hard to build. Her voice cracked as she spoke, but she never faltered. I was terrified of him, she said, her eyes meeting Gregory's cold stare, for the first time since the trial began. He couldn't let go. He wouldn't let me go. And when I met Patrick, it was like a breath of fresh air. But Gregory couldn't accept that. He couldn't accept that I was moving on. And in the end, it cost Patrick his life.
He would message me saying if I didn't leave Patrick, he would harm Patrick. Think about it. If I don't hear from you or the cops, call again. I'll just do what I said and move on.
Gregory didn't react. He sat there unmoving, as though he hadn't heard her words. But in that moment, the jury's gaze shifted. They were no longer seeing a man who was merely misunderstood. They were seeing a man who had deliberately destroyed lives to serve his own twisted sense of entitlement. The defense's attempt to downplay Gregory's guilt was fading. The closing arguments were near. The prosecution painted a damning picture of a man who had crossed every line, who had ignored the humanity of others in his pursuit of control. And the final statement was chilling. Gregory Bender chose violence, the prosecutor said, his voice steady and unyielding. He chose to murder an innocent man. He chose to end a life in cold blood. And now it's time for him to face the consequences of that choice.
He couldn't take that Jessica left him and wouldn't come back to him because of Patrick Davis' service.
As the trial came to a close, the jury filed out to deliberate. But there was no doubt in anyone's mind that the verdict would be clear. Gregory Bender had crossed the line, and justice, while never bringing Patrick back, would finally hold him accountable for his actions. As the days dragged on, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. The jury had deliberated for hours, leaving everyone on edge, wondering when the final verdict would come. Jessica sat in the front row, her hands clenched tightly in her lap, her mind racing with thoughts of what might come next. She had done everything she could to bring Gregory to justice. She had spoken the truth, no matter how painful, and now all that was left was for the jury to decide. The judge finally entered the courtroom, and a hush fell over the room. Gregory sat motionless, his face unreadable, as if he had prepared himself for whatever was about to unfold. The defense team exchanged nervous glances, while the prosecution stood tall, confident in their case. The air was thick with anticipation. The foreman of the jury stood up, holding the piece of paper that would determine Gregory Bender's fate. The silence stretched out for what felt like an eternity as the foreman read the words everyone had been waiting for.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Gregory Bender, as follows. Guilty of the charge of first-degree murder as charged in the indictment.
The words echoed in Jessica's mind, a weight she hadn't fully expected to feel. There was relief, yes, but also an overwhelming sadness. She looked over at Gregory, whose expression remained frozen, as though the verdict had not yet registered in his mind. His eyes were cold, empty. There was no remorse, no sign of guilt. It was as if the consequences had no meaning for him. The judge called for order, and Gregory's sentencing was scheduled for the following week. But even then, Jessica knew that no sentence would ever be enough to bring Patrick back or heal the wounds left by the brutality of his death. She had spent so many years living in fear of him, and now with the truth finally out, she was determined to see him face the full weight of his actions.
He lost everything. He's not going to win again, ever again.
Jessica's story had sparked a conversation, a movement to bring awareness to the dangers of toxic relationships and obsessive love. But for Jessica, the path ahead was still uncertain. The shadow of Gregory's actions would always linger over her, a reminder of the nightmare she had survived. The trial had been a turning point, but healing would take time, and justice was only the beginning of a long, difficult journey. Gregory Bender's sentencing was set, and Jessica knew that in the end, the man who had terrorized her life would be held accountable. But the scars left behind would take far longer to heal. The courtroom may have been where justice was served, but it was in the quiet moments of her life, in the spaces where she could finally breathe again, that Jessica would begin to rebuild.
Will you go on with life as Patrick would like you to do?
I will. I will go on for Patrick. I will live in his happy memories close to my heart.
It was there that she would find the strength to move forward. As Jessica begins to rebuild her life, the legacy of her strength remains. Her story serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of standing up for what's right, even in the face of overwhelming darkness. With Gregory Bender now behind bars, justice was served, but the journey to healing is ongoing for those affected by his crimes. If you found this story as chilling and powerful as we did, don't forget to leave a like and share it with others who might need to hear it. Your support helps bring awareness to the dangers of toxic relationships and the strength it takes to break free. Subscribe for more in-depth true crime stories and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for watching, and remember, the truth always comes to light, no matter how dark the path may seem.